Braveheart Workshops is hosting a virtual online event, creating hope, health, and healing in 2021. Transformation through empowerment and connection. Embrace the truth that you are loved and matter. Join us on Friday, March 12, 2021 from 1 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. During this time of uncertainty, find ways to manage stress, balance your emotions, replenish your energy, promote well-being for yourself and loved ones. Take time to pray and meditate. Give purpose to what you want to achieve in your life pertaining to hope, health, and healing. Join us as our speakers share their stories. Our lineup of speakers include Jill Reynolds, the founder of Braveheart Workshops and our event host. Dr. Laura Wood, our keynote speaker, speaking on embodiment. Krista Alicia, our special guest speaker. Patricia Rogers, Dr. Susie Warden, Alana De La Cruz, Heidi Salzberg-Wild, and Tanya Gibson. The event will be recorded live. After the event, you will receive the recording by email. If you can't attend, you could watch it anytime. Your investment is only $28.99, so please register now. Go to braveheartworkshops.com. The event again is March 12th, 2021 from 1 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please go to braveheartworkshops.com and register today. The Connection Show, creating hope, health, and healing in 2021, sponsored by Braveheart Workshops, and I'm live with Jill Reynolds. Joining me today is Mark Walsh. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Pleasure, Jill.
Well, I'd love the audience, Mark, to know a little bit about you, but your bio is so long, so I'm going to say as much as I can, but it would take 3 days to get through the whole thing. So,
Top three things is fine.
Mark Walsh Aka, Mr. Embodiment, is the co-founder of EFC UK and EFC Russia, the founder of the Embodiment Conference, where he has hosted 500,000 attendees on Zoom, and is the author of Embodiment-Moving Mindfulness in Working with the Body in Training and Coaching. Mark has his BSc with honors in psychology. He has had extensive training and facilitation experience with organizations worldwide. Mark's taught embodied work in 30 plus countries and has lived in 7 of them. Numerous keynotes speaking engagements have included headlining the UK ICF conference, Link at Moscow State University, and many business events. Mark has...
That's more than enough.
Okay, so Mark does everything, just so you know. The guy knows everything, he knows everybody, and I'm honored that he's on my show. So Mark, welcome.
Thanks, Jill. I only really do one thing, which is embodiment. I just do it in different formats: conferences, talks, trainings, podcasts, books, whatever. So that's really all I do is embodiment.
And he's a no-nonsense type of guy, which I love. That we can put on your resume for sure. For sure.
Are you from Jersey or somewhere? You've got that like hard East Coast kind of vibe. I like it.
I'm a Chicago girl who hitchhiked in the 70s and ended up in Arizona, Portland, San Diego, and all kinds of stuff. And I had all kinds of roommates from all over the world. So I'm just one of those misfits. But the thing I love the most about you, Mark, is you're a no-nonsense F-man. I say that because I used to have a T-shirt, and it had the F word all over it. And what I like about you is you'll say whatever you want to say, and it comes out of your mouth so fluently.
I'm known as being fairly outspoken and straightforward in my delivery. I think it's partly a sort of British flavor to personal growth generally, is that there's a lot of sense of humor with it, and a kind of pragmatism, no nonsense. I used to work in war zones with NGOs. I worked in business quite a lot. I've worked with kids quite a lot as well, and they don't really take a lot of bullshit. So I think a lot of the environments I've been in, plus my character, has given me a certain flavor of doing it. Which is I guess has become part of the brand. But
and I think where I picked it up is a totally dysfunctional family where everyone said the F word at each other, and that's how we spoke in our house. our words were, we didn't wake up in the morning and say I love you. We woke up in the morning and said fuck you.
Pretty similar Irish immigrant family, I think. So
anyway, well, just to tell you a little bit about how I do my interviews with my guest speakers, I do things a little bit differently, Mark. So I felt led this year in 2020 when the pandemic hit to connect leaders with others around the world, since we were stuck in the house with this stupid pandemic. And so thus began the Connection Show. And I've been in recovery, Mark, for 39 years from drugs, alcohol, codependency, eating disorders, human sexual abuse, you name it. Everything that exists in the world, I've done it. I think the only thing I haven't done is gone to jail. So anyway, I felt led to give people a platform so that they could share what they do, so the world would be more informed. So thus began the Connection Show. And being that I've been in recovery so many years, I really believe story is what matters. We got to get to story, because when you get to story, you really get to the place that you could authentically connect with others. And I believe story is so impactful when we connect the dots. So what I like to do on my show, Mark, is something just a little bit different. Instead of you sitting here for an hour talking about all the things you do, I like the audience to authentically know the real Mark. So I like connecting dots on the Connection Show. So what I'd like to do is ask you is transparently as you select to be, would you connect the dots back to little Mark and tell us who little Mark was growing up and what life was like for you, and how that life then led you into the field and work that you do today?
Little Mark is what I call my penis. So, I think we had a you mean the younger version of myself.
Yeah.
Okay. So I had a really bad time at school. I had a bad time at secondary school. I really didn't like it. I'm super ADHD, and I didn't like sitting still, and I didn't like the authoritarian structures of it. And I was sort of told that books and book learning was what matters. And I was good at that. And I read a lot of books, and it totally didn't make me happy. And I think a mixture of that sort of slightly restrictive kind of, I went to a state school in a village, but it was run like you imagine a sort of British private school might be run. So it had that kind of old school vibe, and that really didn't suit me at all. And I think if anything, I've got interested in better ways to educate people than the way I was sort of forced into at some pain to myself to have. So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is everyone in my family is nuts. So, and like properly crazy, like schizophrenic, depressed, suicides, alcoholic, pretty much they're all nuts. I mean, even my dad, like having epileptic fits, for example, it got me really interested in consciousness and the mind and, what awareness was, because I'd regularly see him go into these fairly disturbing altered states, where he'd go purple and froth at the mouth and fall on the floor. So I think I got quite interested in that. The other thing, my mum, before she left the convent, was a nun. So there's always been a bit of the mystical in my family too. And coming from a sort of Irish Catholic, but very much the sort of mystical branch of that rather than the mainstream religious branch. Then that was another influence. And I went to Israel with Jewish friends when I was 15, and my mum lost her job and got some money and took me to India and Nepal when I was 16. So I think they were all fairly formative. So by the time I got to university at 18, I had become utterly disillusioned with Western education and book learning. I was a drug addict and alcoholic, so I share the recovery journey with you. I had fallen in and out of love and had mystical experiences doing that, because that kind of was in my blood a little bit. And I'd been to these two wonderful spiritual cultures of the world and been exposed to yoga and meditation. You know, also just to become a mess mentally and emotionally, like most of my family. And by 18, when I walked to university, I sort of realized maybe the answer wasn't going to be found in the library. And I sort of thought, well, where else is it? And another place I found at university was an Aikido school, a martial arts dojo, they call it. And when I walked into there was a sense of sort of coming home, or of rightness, or of being in a place that had a sort of learning that hadn't been offered in school, that maybe had a discipline that I needed, but simultaneously a depth that I longed for. And that was the beginning of my embodiment journey. So I hope that gives you a little bit into the psychoanalytical meanderings of Mark Walsh.
So as you were going through that journey that you just shared, Mark, then did you at some point then, obviously going through all the different modalities of the martial arts and the schooling and stuff, did you then start to utilize any type of therapy for your own recovery with healing? Were you introduced to like internal family systems or EMDR or anything like that you did yourself? Or were you just kind of like, you know, I'm just going to do my martial arts and be in mindfulness and heal myself?
Britain is not America. You essentially have a therapeutic culture in America, even in the mainstream. And people talk about therapy. I mean, some places more than others, more in New York than the Midwest, right? But so that for me was just like a weird idea. No one I knew went to see a therapist growing up. You had to be really crazy. I'd rather kill myself than see a therapist. God, the shame of it. So that was really an option, whereas martial arts as a sort of young working class man was much more like accessible as a thing to do. I think I did eventually go to a counselor after about 3 years of martial arts, but didn't really stick with it. The other thing is, like, I'm a bloke. I don't want to talk about my feelings. You know, what are you talking about? I don't want to talk about my feelings. I want to, you know, do something. So that girly kind of talking about your feelings stuff didn't appeal to me at a young age. You know, eventually I started off with Aikido, and that was sort of macho enough to be accessible. You tell a young man how to fight, and it's like, it's much more accessible than you need to talk about your feelings. And then I discovered that sort of Aikido didn't have everything. And I discovered I like dancing, which again was completely ridiculous to me as a sort of working class British bloke, you know. And then yoga, you know, which is something my mum did, but blokes didn't do. And then gradually I sort of opened my mind to other possibilities, meditation, and eventually therapy. And, you know, now I'm in regular therapy, and that's normal. And I discovered there was a thing called body therapy, which is a bit more kind of my cup of tea than just talking endlessly, you know. So yeah, therapy for me wasn't the initial, it wasn't initially opened. I'm very glad, you know, jokes aside, I'm very glad that taboo has seemed to have gone down a little bit in the UK in that sort of 25 years I just described.
I love that journey. You know, and it's funny, Mark, because, you know, kind of piggying off of what you said, I loved how you said everybody in my family was nuts, because it was the same in our family. Everybody was nuts. And when my mom left my dad and she married the second guy, he was a alcoholic, bisexual, bigamist, and the next guy was an alcoholic who dressed up in women's clothes. So it couldn't have gotten any crazier. And, you know, I just remember on my 18th birthday having my suitcase packed with $20 in my purse, not having a clue where I was going. All I said is, I'm getting the hell out of here. And I never want to look back. And it wasn't until I left home at 18, it wasn't until 28 years old, after complete craziness. And I think that's why I connect with you UK people. I ended up, my first home I lived in was with a Playboy bunny, a black male probation officer, and a white gay cab driver were my first roommates. And I remember getting hired to be a Playboy bunny and turning down the job when they told me I had to wear makeup and stiletto heels. I could handle the bunny outfit. I couldn't handle the fake eyelashes and all that, because I was so unfake. But bringing how I kind of like connected with UK people, I remember, Mark, loving Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and going to my ELP concert and getting in backstage. And from there, I ended up getting to know everybody in the rock and roll industry. So, people say, "Oh, were you a groupie of the 70s?" I said, "No, I didn't sleep with the rock and roll stars, but I sure liked the lighting guys and the sound crew." And it's kind of funny because you said you got into the martial arts. Um, the only part of martial arts that I remember is back in the 70s, living in San Diego. I had gotten into the kind of like the est movement of the 70s, transcendental meditation, and then started to learn Tai Chi on the beach. And I remember going to a Fleetwood Mac concert and being backstage with Stevie Nicks, and she was warming up for her show and doing some like ballet movements. And I'm backstage with her, and I said, "Stevie, could I show you some Tai Chi?" So I remember teaching Stevie Nicks Tai Chi backstage, Mark.
Why not?
So we have some commonalities. So what I love about what you shared is, being a guy growing up in England, the stigmatism about therapy, and then later on you doing the things. Tell us a little bit more about the movement. So you said you got into the movement of even dance. So tell us a little bit about how you got into the movement of dance and what that looked like.
Yeah. So I started with martial arts, which is kind of, it's got this pragmatic side of things. And it's like, hey, I was living in a rough area. I want to defend myself. And then as you get better at martial arts, you get better at breathing and posture and movement and mindfulness, essentially the constituent parts of what I would now call embodiment. So people say, what's embodiment? Study of the body, but through the body in terms of awareness and posture and breathing, the study of the body as who we are. And martial arts are very explicitly not just about fighting. They're about developing yourself as a person. And again, if we look at the body as a way to develop ourselves as people, we're now talking embodiment rather than fitness, right? Usually that's the first question I get asked in an interview. It's quite nice not to be asked what is embodiment. But, so that's the general area in case listeners are kind of going, what the hell is embodiment? And the thing is with embodiment is there's different parts to it. And the martial arts are going to teach you one thing. And I, really recommend that if someone's like, got a teenager who's maybe a bit unconfident and, they need a bit of oomph in their system, then martial arts could be really good for them. Or, for me, it was part of a trauma healing journey and practical for where I was. But then I gradually kind of realized I just loved movement as well. And that there was some movements you just couldn't really do in martial arts because they weren't practical. Like just a very simple thing, like you generally would keep your head on your hips in a central line, they call it in martial arts. You can't do that, because that's falling over. Whereas in dance, you can do that, and you can do all sorts of fun, crazy things. So it's a lot freer. So martial arts gave me the discipline and the structure, but not so much free expression. Again, look at cultural upbringing, right? We're all limited by our cultural upbringings, and mine had taught me to be a little constrained. Very English, hello, pleased to meet you. And actually the expressive dance, like the 5 rhythms, the conscious dance, the ecstatic dance, that was wonderful for developing expressiveness, letting it all out. And then there's the partner dance. I started dancing tango. When I realized there was beautiful women in fantastic shoes, I immediately signed up for that. And tango meant you could study relationship and leading and following, which, you can study in Aikido too, but without the perfume. And it's, a whole nother side opens up when you're exploring sensuality and this, I'm kind of half joking about the shoes, aesthetics and sensuality and eroticism, as well as leading and following. It's just very different learning that than it is learning martial arts with a bunch of sweaty blokes, right? So the way I look at embodiment is this big area, and depending on what you want to develop, either in terms of like life skills, like leading and following, or in terms of your own being. So, martial arts might make you kind of, more disciplined. Free dance might make you more expressive. Then we need to study different things. And I sort of gradually became the geeky guy who knew about everything in embodiment. Not a lot about everything, but at least a little bit about everything. And I, as you say, now I know a lot of the top teachers and I've run conferences, and I'm kind of the guy who fits it all together because, what Zoom class do you do on a Tuesday night? A conversation with you and give you some.
Well, I love hearing that, how your journey was with the dance, because I had a journey of dance, but I love that you took it to a level, and it's kind of funny. My level of wholeness came in a different realm. My father, in his 20s, was a Fred Astaire dance instructor, Mark, and as a children growing up, he always would want to teach us how to dance. And my sister, who just passed away, she was phenomenal with my dad. They could do the tango, they could do the swing, they could do everything. The only thing I could ever do was the cha-cha-cha. And a lot of it had to do with, I was that lost child who was so lost that trying to follow someone was almost impossible. And I like you had really bad ADD as well. And so when I did dancing with my dad, Mark, I could never follow. What I didn't know until years later of doing my own processes, at 14 I was date raped. And as a result of that date rape, I really wanted to hide my body image. I wanted to mask my body image. Years later, did I not know why, I ended up going out with a guy who owned a naked bar in San Diego. And the next thing I knew, I had some of the girls at the bar saying, Jill, you got to just try this. And I thought, oh, there's no way I'm going to dance in front of men naked. But got drunk, got high on some coke, and decided to get up on stage. And I realized, Mark, pardon me?
Naked bar, do you mean like a strip club?
Yeah, yep. But full nude.
Huh?
Full Monty, as they say. And yeah. And what I liked about it was that in this place, the customers were not allowed to touch any of the dancers, else the bouncers threw them out. So what I didn't know at the time, but I know now, I really loved it because it empowered me to sexualize men without them touching me. And it was part of that healing I was going through that I didn't even know I was going through, to be empowered after my date rape and sexual abuse growing up. And so I had a whole new discovery of those who have been abused. Instead of judging the man or the woman who's a dancer, or the man or the woman who's a prostitute, I now came into a new enlightenment that what is the reason they're doing this? And I really believe it's empowerment. There's empowerment that comes from it. But what I loved about dancing, where a lot of the women who danced, Mark, were very sensual. I, on the other hand, would get up and do songs to like Car Wash. We might not ever get rich, but it's better than digging a ditch at the car wash. You know, and I'd get up there and just have a blast dancing to these songs, freestyle. And it just gave me a whole new enlightenment of my body. And not knowing anything back then about healing or recovery, I now realize I was really getting in touch with embodiment and finding out who my body was for the first time, because I was so disconnected from my body that even when I went to treatment, Mark, one time that we were doing body image group, and I remember saying to the therapist in the group, I said, I don't get all these people in here that have so much body image issues. I said, I'm 100 pounds overweight. And I said, I don't mind putting on a swimming suit and going to the beach because I love the water. I said, I don't understand why everybody's so stuck in body image issues. She looked at me and said, Jill, that's because you don't even know you have a body.
Right.
You don't even know it exists. So let's talk about that. Like when you work with people and they've had so much trauma and they're so stuck in the non-essence of their body, and how this work that you do really brings them into center and start finding self.
Okay. So you use the critical word there, which is disconnect. So if embodiment's about connection, connecting to self, which enables us to connect to others, values, planet, then trauma, we can say, is about disconnection. So when there's some kind of overwhelming stress, and I've been around that. I've worked with the gay population of Russia a lot. I've worked with refugees. I've worked with street kids in Brazil and kids in East Africa. I've worked with soldiers in Ukraine. Whatever the overwhelming experience is, whether it's a war or abuse or whatever it is, there's a disconnect from the body. And that might show up as a kind of numbing of the body or chronic tension that's called armoring, or it might show up as a sort of just general dissociation from the body, of being spaced out, or not being there. Yeah. And the way people heal from that is varied, but it's usually some attempt to regain a sense of power. So, it's kind of a cliche actually in the therapeutic industry that people in stripping and prostitution or sex work and other kind of areas can have abuse backgrounds. And sometimes it's a really unhealthy playing out, or like repetition compulsion, they call it, Other times it's a sort of healthy move towards empowerment. I have a good friend who's both a stripper and a therapist, and she talks about this quite a lot. I can't put her name out here, unfortunately, but she's a very interesting friend of mine locally, and it's very interesting to talk to her because she's obviously got both perspectives,
Well, and I paused there for just a second. What was funny about the place I worked, Mark, Miss Nude World worked there. She was like the most gorgeous woman you'd ever want to see. And I'd say 99.9% of the women I danced with were 36, 24, 36, like tens, gorgeous women. And most of them were very educated and degreed. We had professional therapists, nurses, you name it, that worked, and they couldn't make enough money in their profession, so they'd strip 2 to 3 days a week and make enough money and then go back and see their clients.
Yeah, there's the money side of things as well, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm an expert on this, so I probably shouldn't talk about it too much, but it's yeah, I mean, the journey to healing for people comes in different shapes and sizes and normally involves safety and empowerment. So, having the bouncers there, I imagine, was the sense of safety, right? Like, hey, I can't be touched here. So that makes complete sense to me. And people kind of coming back home to their own body and finding that safety in their own body is a big one. But then, there's all the little micro traumas everybody has that wasn't necessarily abused or raped or in a war or anything like that, which is a sort of subtle disconnects we all have. Yeah, and then in terms of re-establishing embodiment, that's a healing journey for, I'd say, us as a species. For us as a species, intergenerational trauma. I've got trauma from my Irish family. Someone else has got a Jewish family. Someone else is Black. There's all sorts of trauma that goes through the generations to look at that affects our embodiment. And just body shame is really normal too. Not the same as trauma, but maybe sort of sitting next to it. Most people don't have issues around their body. And to do with the media, how we're presented our bodies, the image of the perfect body. So, I mean, that comes up. I do a business workshop on leadership. And as soon as you mention the body, grown men are kind of tittering at the back and giggling, making jokes because we've the body's still taboo. The body's still something for sort of sex and farting, and that's about it. So, it's unfortunately a reality that the body is denied. We see that with the COVID lockdown too, that the basic needs of connection are not fully considered, I would say, in terms of the essentialness of touch, not as a nice to have, but as a basic human need, for example. So I think people still haven't really come to terms with the importance of connection, basic sort of biopsychosocial needs yet.
So going into that, so for myself, and it's the way I connect the dots to connect with you, is so Mark, when I got date raped at 14, I didn't tell a soul until I got into my 40s and 50s in therapy. And what I found myself doing, and I'm sure you can relate to this, and we'll take off this direction. When I started to talk about it in therapy, it was just what I just said. Oh, at 14, I got date raped and blah, blah, blah. And that was about the extent of my processes, because it was talk therapy, it was cognitive therapy. And so it was all in the head. It was like connecting this horrific trauma with cognitive therapy in the head. And so thus, later on in life, as I continued my healing and recovery, and then discovered internal family systems with Dr. Laura Wood at Castlewood when I was in treatment, and I started to go deeper in this essence of healing. Later in my journey, I connected in Chicago with a group called Wounded Heart. And it's a book called Wounded Heart and then Healing the Wounded Heart by Dan Allender. He's a psychiatrist out of Seattle with the Seattle School of Theology. And the one thing that Dan taught us, he teaches around the world trauma workshops, and he teaches story workshops, teaching people how to talk and write and share story. But the one thing that Dan taught us, because we were being interviewed for one of his e-series, Mark, is he said there's an important factor that many of us miss. And in sharing story, many of us tell story, and I'm sure you could relate to this with all the people you've worked with, at a helicopter view. We're up here in the helicopter, and we're sharing this story about, I grew up in a totally dysfunctional, insane family. I was sexually abused, blah, blah, blah. So we're in the helicopter, looking over in the war zone. But now what is it like with those special forces when they're in that helicopter, and now they got to come down quickly and land that plane? How do you land that plane? And so Dan taught us, in order for true healing, the essence of healing to be, is when you can get out of the helicopter and learn how to land your plane. And so what we did in our group is we all trauma. And Dan explained it, Mark, that everyone in life has trauma. Some are small t trauma and large T. And he explained a small t might be you're married, you go through a divorce, and it's your first Christmas alone. So that's a small t.
Oh.
But because a lot of people hate the word, I don't know, you could talk on this, hate the word trauma. So I say that because when people go, oh, I don't have much trauma in my life, I go, okay, well, you at least have a small t. So Dan taught us to start landing the plane. So what did I do, Mark? I ended up taking my trauma story of rape and I wrote it in 1,000 words. And then I presented it to in my Wounded Heart group. And I'm getting goosebumps now. Whenever I have epiphanies, I get goosebumps everywhere, Mark. And so I'm reading this out loud, and all of a sudden just floodgates came up. And memories in my body came back. And then a few months later, Dr. Laura and I did one of our Braveheart workshops, burden releases, and I always go last in my retreats, Mark, because I tell stories so big I don't want to freak people out. So this particular retreat, I said to Laura about the fourth person, and I said, I got to go next. And I said, Laura, I got to sit in the center of the room, and I've got to read this story again of my date rape. So I sat in the center of the room, and Laura's one of the most intuitive people I've ever met in my entire life. I sat and said, and grieved this date rape. And she said, Jill, I would normally do an expressive around this, but I think we need to do somatic today. So we got the couch, and we got one of the guys to play my rapist, and she put me on the couch and sat on top of me and pushed me down. And somatically, I was able to get the rapist off of me and the rape out of my body for the first time. So let's go into that with you of what you've seen, how this works. So audience, so much different than me going to see a therapist and telling the therapist I was date raped and not ever getting in touch with the body and what it did to me versus now somatically getting it out of the body.
Yeah, so often there's a sense of sort of feeling through things, letting them complete. So incomplete things like Peter Levine's work in somatic experiences around completion. What you just described there is almost identical to how a guy called Paul Linden, who's one of my main mentors, works. He'll actually recreate situations of powerlessness, but with a different ending, right? So give a different ending. So he'll teach a self-defense technique, for example. And it's really interesting to see the look in people's eyes as they throw the sort of attacker off them. And there's a sort of huge empowerment. You've got a bit of that going on now, right? There's a huge sort of glow or empowerment when people have that sense of like, wow, I'm able to process this through the body. And then there's other body modality processing like TRE, shaking modalities that kind of have a theory around that, or EMDR I've had, which is very good, which is an eye movement modality. But they're all basically leading to somatic, therefore psychological processing, rather than just retelling the story. By the way, if people are listening and they are going to retell or rewrite their story, they should do it from safe to safe again. So it's a little kind of mistake people make is sometimes they tell the story or they write the story and they just say the bad part. And actually that's almost like getting your brain stuck in the bad part, just reliving it, rather than, you know, what's generally advised by trauma therapists, which I'm not one, remember, so I'm not about to enter into trauma therapy with you live on air. Is that I'm not qualified to do that just for my own boundaries. But what they generally advise is to tell or write the story from safe through the danger to safe again, so that there's some sense that it's over and completion. But without the body, as you say, that can be done at this helicopter, 10,000 foot level. You're not really getting into the juice of it.
Yeah. So I think that makes the difference in exactly what you're saying, going from safe to safer, which is what we did because we were in this safe environment. I trust Laura with my entire life, and I trusted the man playing this. And then the safety was me being able to push him out of the room and verbally swear at him and get him off of me and have that out of my body. It was so powerful. It was so powerful. So tell us a little bit more about what it is you're doing now, because I connected, Laura actually introduced me and said, you got to listen to Mark. So I came to your summit that you just had, and you've got so many cool things happen, and I want the audience to know about you more.
Yeah, we did a big event called the Embodiment Conference last October. And because the world was on lockdown, 500,000 people turned up because, Zoom was all the rage. And that was cool. And then I went, what the hell do I do after that? So I just went and had a rest for a bit because it was pretty exhausting. I had a bit of burnout from it, to be honest. So I just went and chilled out with my wife. And since then we set up a company called Embodiment Unlimited, and we offer courses online around embodiment, which is possible. It's years ago I would have said what a contradiction, but now I know what you can and can't do online. We still have face-to-face courses. You mentioned EFC in my bio, so the Embodied Facilitator course, which is a face-to-face course for trainers and coaches to work with the body. That's not running this year because of COVID, but except in Moscow because the Russians don't give a shit. And we
let everyone die. We don't care. Clean out the population.
So the Russians don't care. So we're in Moscow, but generally we're not doing it in the UK or USA or Germany this year because of COVID. But we're the online courses. We did one on ethical marketing, one on life purpose, and we have one called Foundations of Embodiment that's coming up. And I still run my podcast, Embodiment Podcast. I just wrote a second book, working with the body and training and coaching, which is kind of my area. So I continue. I work online. I'm teaching a university this week. I'm coaching Russian oligarchs. What else am I doing this week? Running tutorial groups next for people who bought the conference package. That's the next thing in my calendar today. So you just have a wide variety of online embodiment teaching, basically.
And where are you living now, Mark?
Well, I was just in Mexico for 2 months, which was very nice. And I'm now quarantined and miserable in grey, rainy England. I live in Brighton, which is a sort of alternative capital of England, near London. It's a sort of gay British seaside town. And it's very nice. And so I live here with my wife. And for now, we're here. Though the world's changing, and it's going to be interesting where I decide to be in a year's time, maybe, because I'm not sure I want to continue living in a place that has repeated quarantines.
Well, come to Branson, Missouri. We haven't been on lockdown for like 6 months, and we are it's gorgeous here. Because we're still
not going to have any. No one's visiting, are they? In Missouri?
Oh no! Oh, of course. Yeah, we did very well during from the summer. Branson is a tourist town. It's kind of like we're kind of like the Bible Belt Las Vegas. We got all the shows here, all the entertainment. So the shows are open at 50% capacity. So you got a 1,600 seat theater, Mark, and they're still putting in 600 people. And I mean, I was in Walmart shopping the other day, and I'd say 60% of the people weren't even wearing masks anymore here. So we're done with this.
That was definitely a bit more relaxed than some other places.
Oh no, I'm so over this. I'm like, come on, let's do retreats again, guys. Like, let the part of fear out of you. We're not going to die. We know how to treat this. There's cures. I was in the hospital 5 days and I got better. Did my remdesivir and my Dicardin, and I was cool.
Different people differently, does it? And I'm no medical expert, so I'm not going to give any medical advice out. Though I have been concerned with the lack of connection and some of the mental health, impact of people not having touch and those social needs kind of met. I think there's a long-term and a short-term consequence to lockdowns that isn't necessarily weighed against other medical concerns.
Well, and not only that, but the fear people have constantly that they're going to die. It's like, we're not going to die. We're going to be okay, And so I've got a whole another concept of that. But anyway, and not to minimize those who have lost their life, because I don't want to minimize, but
out there listening, I just want to be aware of that. And, is it 99.7% survival rate and more if you're under 60?
Yeah.
And, now, is that nothing? No, that's thousands of people dying still.
And people's loved ones. So I don't want to minimize people's loved ones who died, because it is so. But I can say personally, just because I have a personal testimony, is my sister died September 28th of pancreatic cancer. She had 12 weeks and she was gone. And then my father, my beloved father, 94 years old, Mark, this is the Tango dancer. He would go to the fitness center. My dad would go to the fitness center, Mark, 3 days a week, do 50 laps in the water, do a full circuit, walk around the gym and tell everyone, come on, you gotta get fit. At 94 years old, World War II vet, just a stitch. Every day he'd get up and go to the Shell gas station and spend $100 on his lotto tickets because he was sure he was going to win the lotto. So anyway, 5-6 days I'm in Montana doing my first live event at a horse ranch with Habit Finder, and I get a call saying my dad was taken by ambulance. So after the retreat, I flew to Chicago, and long and short, my sister died on September 28th. My dad died on September 30th at the hospital. And while I'm at the hospital declaring my father's death with the pulmonary doctor, I said, hey, could you check my lungs while I'm here? So my dad died on the 3rd floor. By 11 o'clock, I was admitted on the 5th floor in isolation with COVID, and started immediately on the remdesivir. And 5 days later, I walked out completely fine. And what I found as a result of this, Mark, what I found is the majority, because I've known many people who this has happened to, they're not being told to go to the hospital when their temperatures get to 100.4 and above. Not 104, but 100.4. They immediately should go to the hospital. And one thing that I've come to learn is a lot of these damn hospitals, because of money, are just giving these people chest x-rays. Well, COVID doesn't show up in a chest x-ray. So they send them home telling them they got pneumonia. In 48 hours, they're nearly on their deathbed. So what I learned by having my own COVID, Mark, is you got to insist on them giving you a CT scan, because COVID will show up in your lungs on a CT scan. And that's what the hospital did. And so they treated me very rapidly. And I'm 67 with autoimmune disease, all kinds of stuff. And I was fine. So yeah. I just share that because I feel like it's important for people to really know what to do if you get it, to really know.
Sorry for your loss with your family there as well. I just kind of want to acknowledge that. And,
Thank you.
It was in a short period of time. And yeah, I'm not going to give any medical advice. I'm not qualified, but it sounds like you wanted something to be out there. So I try and stay away from giving opinions on the sort of medical side of COVID, just because I don't know enough about it.
Well, and I'm not even doing medical. I'm just saying, there's definitely ways to stay alive if you have the right care. I think a lot of it is the right care. But you know what? Even with all the stuff I went through, Mark, it was such a gift how the timing was for me, because if I didn't get COVID, I probably would have gone into my atypical whirlwind of busyness with funerals and selling my dad's house and blah, blah, blah. But because I had COVID and I had to be in quarantine for like 2 weeks in the hotel, I was able to just curl up in a fetal position and do my own embodied crying and rocking and breathing for like days on end. So it was really cool to get my grief work out. It's like, wow. And, so people would say, oh, gosh, you must have really had the worst ever. And I said, no, I had so much like acknowledging my grief and doing my daddy work. It was really good.
The space to breathe.
Yeah. Like you say, go from safe to safer. I needed to go into this modality of really healing myself. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. So anyway, for the audience, I would love for you to know how to reach out to Mark. This is his full bio, which you could see is long. It's, excuse me, got his websites and everything. And so I now follow you, Mark, and have 10 different Facebook pages that I post in for different people, their events. So in my Braveheart Women's group, in my Braveheart Workshops group, folks, I will post up to upcoming events and summits that Mark has. So if you've enjoyed getting to know him better, keep in touch with me on those pages so that you'll know more about where Mark is. And Mark, I'm hoping that when things open up internationally, that you can come to Branson and we can do an embodiment summit here in Branson and pull people from the United States together and meet up with you personally.
Well, thank you, Jill. If listeners have podcasts, they can look at the Embodiment podcast. If they like books, we have, just go to Amazon and put an embodiment. And, we've got Embodiment Unlimited Facebook group. People are there. Instagram, Mark Walsh, all the normal stuff if people are interested in the topic. But I better get going in a minute, Jill. So thank you very much for your time today. Much appreciated.
Okay. Thanks a lot for joining us, everyone. We'll see you soon. Have a wonderful day, Mark.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us on The Connection Show. Let's connect now. Let's restore and reconnect in community. Enhance connection in our online connection circles. A place to meet up, gather, and feel welcomed. To join us, go to COM. Click on the Books Podcast tab, and then the Connection Circles drop down. On the pop-up, join our Connection Circles Facebook group. Our circles meet from 8 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Share story, topics, and laughter with men and women. To learn more about Connection Circles, go to braveheartworkshops.com. Thanks for joining us on The Connection Show, and have a great day.